the FDA is one destination, but I do believe we can do a lot more with the data. Mortality is incredibly hard. And that, of course, is going to have a huge impact, because if we can actually run trials with fewer patients, that's amazing. It means, I think, it can also really help with inclusivity and diversity in trials. Any travel for me would be completely inaccessible. There wasn't just an app that helped you raise your hand in the street. The demand for nurses also goes up.
Hello and welcome to Industry Voice series. Today we will be talking about clinical data, its scalability, and the overall digitalization of the pharmaceutical research industry. Our guest today is the CEO of the top-ranked eClinical solution providers, Castor. Please meet Dirk Arts.
Dirk, thank you very much for joining me today. Hopefully we'll have a very productive conversation today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here with you, and hope I can shed some more insights into the mysterious worlds of decentralized trials.
So for the past 2 years, we've been hearing more and more about decentralized clinical trials. Could you please elaborate on virtual visits and decentralized trials, and how do they work, and how exactly can they transform the industry?
I think people that know me know that I don't really believe in a sort of a binary distinction between decentralized and regular clinical trials. I think also over the past 2 years, we have established that most trials will end up being hybrid, as in looking at how many visits can we actually move to a patient's home, which you could call a virtual visit or a remote visit, where the patient remains in their home and through a video call, for example, they are taken through an assessment with the site coordinator or CRC, and the concept is of course to try to reduce travel and to try to reduce burden on patients. And I think what we'll see actually happening when you talk about transformation in the industry as a whole is protocols, new studies slowly, step by step, adopting more and more remote visits, and also things like remote consent, for example, and incorporating more ePro, where we assess patients remotely through an app, for example. And so I don't think it's a binary thing, but I do think it's a great win for patients and clinical trials as a whole to have the ability to move trials to the patient's home. I think that ultimately will transform the industry, because it's going to make it a lot more attractive for patients to stay in a trial. And I think that's something that we're currently struggling with to maximize patient retention and to make it attractive for patients to participate, or even possible. Right? So I think it can also really help with inclusivity and diversity in trials if we play our cards right and make sure that it's easier for anyone wherever they are in the world to participate in a trial. And I think that's actually the biggest need that we have.
So do you believe that a decentralized clinical trial is a way out during situations like pandemic, both for the sponsors and for the patients?
It definitely provides methods of conducting the trial that work better in a situation where you can't travel or where you can't go to a hospital site or a research site. So it definitely provides a way out. But I think what is actually most important is that it provides a way out of the traditional research paradigm, which is very much where the participant is a subject, and the subject has to just follow the protocol and just show up wherever and isn't engaged and isn't getting information from the trial. I think actually that is the biggest thing we need to find our way out of, and I see the pandemic as a sort of catalyst to making that happen. But I don't think that the goal of more hybrid, more patient-friendly trials is not to be pandemic ready. I think that's a nice bonus, but I think actually what we're talking about here is making trials better in general, so that it's more attractive to participate in a trial, that the burden is less, and we focus a lot more on the human being, on the trial participant as a human and their lives, as opposed to being very focused on just completing the protocol as fast as possible. Because in the end, I think we all agree that by focusing more on the human, we will actually have more efficient trials, because it's going to be much easier for people to participate and to remain engaged. And ultimately, that's going to have great results for the quality of the data and the time it takes to complete a trial. So the answer is yes, I do think these methods help in a situation where there's a global pandemic, of course. But I don't think that's the ultimate point. I think it's a nice benefit of making the necessary improvements in our industry that we needed for a long time.
And based on your experience, how do home visits and siteless monitoring work in the US, in Europe, or maybe other markets? We know that it's a new practice, so we would appreciate your input on that.
There's many different models. I think the most accessible one is where you take, for example, the consenting visit and you allow that to happen remotely through a video call or a basic assessment that is, an observer rated scale, for example, where you have a maybe clinical research coordinator going through a questionnaire with the patient. Like that doesn't necessarily have to happen face to face. That can also happen on a video call, for example. So I think that's the most basic one that is pretty straightforward and easy to implement. I think one step over that is the actual home visit, where you send an in-home nurse, for example, to do an assessment. I think they all happen in pretty similar ways, and it's always pretty complex. And so I think in-home nursing is a great benefit, specifically if you're working with a population who's comfortable with having someone in their home, which isn't automatically true, by the way, but for many patient populations, of course, it's a benefit to not have to go to a site for a blood draw, for example. But I think in general, it comes down to a scheduling piece where first the availability of the home nursing staff is evaluated, and then the patient gets to choose a slot that works for them. And then hopefully all the logistics work out, and the nurse shows up at the right time at the patient's house so that they're actually there, and the patient didn't forget it or isn't like on an extended shopping trip or something like that. And then the visit can happen, usually using technology in the site, or sorry, in the home to capture data right there. So direct data capture, I think, is quite common in home nursing setting, where you're capturing data directly on a tablet, for example. Otherwise, I think the visit happens mostly as it would at the site, because you're basically bringing research staff into the patient home. I think the big challenge is just the scheduling and making sure it actually happens. And there's just a lot more moving parts in the end for that where it could potentially go wrong. And I think that's a big challenge we're still trying to overcome as we're scaling in-home nursing, and the demand for nurses also goes up, right, for these types of situations. I'm not sure there's a distinct difference between how things work in the US or in Europe. I think it's all pretty similar. And in the end, what I expect is we'll see a nice combination of just a virtual visit or like a televisit, right? So where you just have a video call, and an actual person visiting someone's home. But at the same time, we also see the rise of companies like Walgreens and CVS and others that are trying to offer near home services for clinical trials. And I think that's a factor we shouldn't forget about, because I do think that in many cases, patients would prefer to walk 1 block or 2 blocks to their nearest pharmacy, for example, for a quick blood draw, than have someone in their home. The question there, I think, is can these pharmacies actually pull it off and offer the level of quality and reassurance that a normal site would. So I think that's what we're going to see in the next few years. Can they actually sort of raise the bar to that level, and how comfortable are patients going to be? Because I think for many that's actually preferred. Like if I have to have someone come into my home, or I can walk 2 blocks, I would probably just walk 2 blocks, because I have a lot more control over it and I don't have to stay at home, etc. So I think that's the final sort of push we're going to see in the next few years on that topic.
Thank you for such thorough information on that topic. And before we move forward, I want you to rate the overall digitalization of the industry today. Of course, we cannot talk about the whole world because it differs, obviously, but you can choose maybe a specific market.
On a scale of 1 to 10, or how would you want me to rate it?
Yeah, and just give some feedback on that as well.
Yeah, I think like a 3 out of 10 or something. It's pretty disappointing in my opinion. The thing is, when I think about making something technology driven, technology and data driven, the key would be to actually benefit from the fact that we're using technology. And I think almost everything that I've seen in the clinical trial world or in life sciences space is transforming a paper approach or an analog approach into the exact copy, but then digital. So yes, technically that's digitization. However, you're not actually improving the process very much. One example I used recently was, we all know how you normally hail a cab in New York or actually anywhere on the street, right? You put up your hand and you wait for someone to drive by, and hopefully they're not with someone already, and they stop, and it's a pretty involved process that doesn't always work well. And so then we saw the rise of the ride-hailing apps or ride-sharing apps or whatever you want to call them. It's like Uber and Lyft and many others. And there wasn't just an app that helped you raise your hand in the street, right? Like it wasn't like, now put your hand up and hold your phone out or something like that. No, it was like a completely different approach, right? Payment is different, scheduling is different. There's a whole system behind it that makes sure that there are cars in the neighborhood where most people are. Like it's just a completely different approach to the same problem. And I feel like that we haven't seen at all in our industry. Well, that's not true. We have seen some of it. But I think the vast majority of digitization, as it even happened, because there's still a lot of paper out there, is very focused on, okay, let's just make this digital thing, this paper thing digital, but not actually rethinking the process. So that's why I rated a 3 out of 10, because I feel you have a long way to go to really think about how technology can do something differently and better than we have on paper as human beings. So that's the big next step for me.
And since we already started talking about paper and spreadsheets and so on, what would be the benefits of using a clinical data management system to capture and manage patient information as opposed to using paper and spreadsheets and other methods?
Yeah, well, the obvious one is just the fact that you can process it directly, right? So it's immediately securely stored in the cloud, so you can't lose it anymore. You can't spill water on it. You don't have to store it somewhere. It's automatically, it's a digital format already, so you can analyze it directly. All the very easy to understand benefits. It's more secure as well, easier to collaborate. Like I can go on and on, right? Like I think it's well established why paper isn't really worth it anymore. However, what I think is pretty painful for the industry is the fact that there's still so many studies using paper, and that's because technology is complicated and expensive, as what a lot of people feel. And that's that's pretty sad. We should do better as an industry and tech industry to make it very easy to forget about paper, because the next step, the step that I was just talking about, going from just digitizing paper to actually changing the processes and really using technology, that's where things really can come together. So starting to use technology to remove the need for edit checks and for data monitoring. By using technology to do direct data capture and linking directly to electronic source data, removing the need for source data verification in due time, or at least simplifying that process significantly, allowing for centralized monitoring processes supported by artificial intelligence. So it's much easier to spot issues with data from maybe 6 different data streams. Because we're all very excited about bringing multiple data streams into a trial, from the patients, from a wearable, from the EHR, from the site, from the local labs. But that's almost an impossible task for a human to manage, to monitor. And so we can do so much more with technology. And none of that can happen when it's on paper. So for me, it's 2 steps. It's all the basic benefits from going to paper to a digital format. But then the big step is coming from a digital format to actually a technology data-driven process for running a clinical trial and disseminating knowledge from a clinical trial into the world, so that the FDA is one destination, but I do believe we can do a lot more with the data. And so capturing it in digital format is just the foundation for actually the future of our industry, in my opinion.
And how do you think the need for data streamlining services for clinical trials appeared? And how did companies like yours identify this need?
Well, I think more and more people realize that a lot of data already exists in the world. And it's wasteful to try to capture the data again, specifically if you first do it on paper and then you transcribe it into an EDC. So I think there was a need in the market to tap into other data sources that already existed. And I think that's where interoperability comes in. So how do we make sure that our technology is interoperable with the outside world so that you can more easily import data from an EHR system or a wearable or a lab, where you can more easily transform data to SDTM or to maybe HL7 Fire to push data back into a clinical system. So slowly the world is starting to realize the need for incorporating real world data and actually generating more real world evidence even, also in registration trials, for example. And so the further we push with that, which I think is a great development, because I do feel the average randomized clinical trial isn't representative enough of the current real world. And of course we do late phase studies, but I do believe that we can do a lot better already making earlier studies more realistic and actually using it as a foundation for a longer running real world evidence project that can truly show the benefit of an intervention on a certain patient population or potentially, a subgroup. And so I think that trend is going to continue, and that means more data of different types of quality, which means bigger need for technology platforms that can streamline the integration of data. And so I think there wasn't one moment when this appeared. This is just a very slow moving, basically development. And everybody, I think, realizes that it needs to be done, but it's pretty difficult to do it well. And I think that's the opportunity for companies like Castor to do this really well and really create a technology platform that is fit for the future, as opposed to just focus on replacing paper.
And now let's talk about the product that you offer in more details. So is the interface of your platform easy to use for investigators, and do you provide any training prior to the use of it?
Yeah, I think so. I was a medical doctor myself, and I did a PhD in the early days of my career. And what I saw was that all the physicians and investigators were struggling with all the technology they were faced with, and they had to use tools like Epic and other EHR systems that were really not built to be user-friendly. Things have improved over time, of course. But I vowed to myself that I wouldn't be creating something that wasn't user-friendly. So creating user-friendly technology has always been one of our core values. I'm not saying we always get it 100% right, but we actually do proper user research and we have people test the technology we are putting out there in the market. And so I do think our platform is one of the most user-friendly for investigators to use. And we do work with them. And of course, we also provide trainings in the form of an academy, sometimes with study-specific training programs. And we support them wherever they need help, because we do recognize it's extremely important to keep the investigators engaged and make it easy for them to use the technology.
So patient centricity has been a major debate, a major subject for debates. How would you define a patient-centric approach in your own words, and how is it reflected in modern software solutions?
Yeah, that's a great question. So for me, it's really about recognizing that we're actually asking human beings with their own lives to participate in a trial that is going to be very cumbersome for them. So if I look at myself, I have a busy job, I have 2 small children, I'm married, and I also want to spend time with friends and exercise, right? So I have my family, I have my friends, I have the need to exercise, I have my work, and then I would also have to add somehow the ability to participate in the trial to that. Well, any trial that requires any travel for me would be completely inaccessible. So it wouldn't be an inclusive trial for someone of my profile, because I just don't know how to fit it in. Now, obviously, if I had a disease that was severe and that was where I was looking for hope and for a new cure potentially, or at least to help patients around me, probably I would prioritize participation in a trial over some of these other things, but it would always be a compromise, and I would always deprioritize things that are actually very dear and important to me. And I think that's what it's about. How do we create a situation where we actually focus on the human being that in the trial and where they all have their own personal lives, and how do we adapt protocols to wrap around that as opposed to the other way around? And so that's really how I define it, thinking about approaches that make it a lot easier for a human being with their own complete full life to participate in a trial without that being a huge burden. So that it becomes also a lot more normal to participate, because I would happily participate in a clinical trial if it was a small investment, also as a healthy volunteer. And I think if we normalize clinical trial participation and we make it a lot easier and less burdensome, we can also solve a lot of the recruitment challenges that we see today. And modern software solutions obviously are trying to do that. They're trying to make it easy to focus more on the patient. So if I look at our platform, the Castor platform, we can allow a sponsor or CRO to use our solution in a very traditional way. So site-based, ECRFs using source data verification. That's possible. It's obviously not what we are most excited about, but we recognize that it's still what basically most of the industry does. And I think if you want to innovate in this industry, you need to be very aware of how things are currently going, because we don't change things overnight, and for obvious reasons, right? At the other end of the spectrum, you can use the same technology platform on the same servers with the same training to run a fully siteless, decentralized clinical trial. If your protocol allows for it, you could actually do all the visits remotely, remote consenting, screening, or the other way around, actually screening, consenting, enrolling them in the ePro app, capturing data on them remotely through televisits, where you as a study coordinator are sitting behind your computer with the video call open, typing directly into, doing eSource direct data capture into the platform while you're interfacing with the patient. The same technology, and I think that's how modern technology should approach it. It shouldn't be binary. We should give choice to the study teams and to the sponsors to, based on the protocols, decide what is relevant. So you can have a completely traditional trial on one end of the spectrum and a completely siteless trial on the other end of the spectrum. But what we see most is somewhere in between, hybrid, where you just per visit decide what you can do. And that's, I think, what we should all strive for in the eClinical space, to offer flexibility, scalability, strong APIs to connect the platform to other solutions, to really cater to that patient-centric approach.
Thank you very much for your input. I think our audience will find it very useful. And on a closing note, I would like to talk about some of the trends in healthcare that we face today. For instance, digital health, artificial intelligence. From your perspective, which of these innovations will have a long-lasting impact, and which will provide the greatest benefit for patients?
It's going to be a bit of a boring answer, but I'm not sure if you've followed sort of all the recent developments of artificial intelligence. I actually think it's more machine learning. Although I think if you would call anything intelligent, it's probably those image generators. I'm not sure if you've seen that, but you can type like a prompt where you describe something, and then the AI, they actually create an image based on your prompt. So one of them is called DALL-E, based on the Wall-E character in the Pixar movies. And it's just mind-blowing. Like it's just suddenly so good that everybody is just like, how is this even possible? Like AI wasn't able to do anything, basically, like anything real. And now all of a sudden, boom, it's doing something so amazing that human beings can distinguish art created by the AI from art created by a human being. At the same time, you have these kind of AI-assisted typewriters where you just type and it kind of fills out your article, and you can just create different variations of it, which apparently is very good. I'm really eager to try it. I have tried DALL-E. It is indeed mind-blowing. I haven't tried the AI typewriter. I think that's on one end of the spectrum, and on the other end of the spectrum, we have a ton of like failed AI things, specifically in healthcare and life science. It's really hard to do anything useful with AI in medicine and in healthcare. Now, obviously, I'm a big proponent of trying that, but I'm also an epidemiologist, and I have a PhD in where I research how technology can support more effective decision making. So I know moving the needle, specifically if you look at mortality, so all-cause mortality, is incredibly, incredibly hard. So I'm quite excited to see these sort of different applications of artificial intelligence on the other end of the spectrum. And so we're now talking about generating text, generating images, but what about generating protocols, right? Can we use AI to generate better protocols based on 1,000 protocols and their outcomes? Or can we use that type of AI, so this stable diffusion methodology, for example, to generate better synthetic patients? Like there's a big move on the synthetic patient side with the creating placebo, like synthetic controls, basically. So virtual or synthetic placebo patients, to reduce the need for healthy volunteers for non-interventional enrollment in a trial. And that, of course, is going to have a huge impact, because if we can actually run trials with fewer patients, that's amazing. It means more patients are going to get the intervention, so they're going to be randomized to the intervention arm. And the arm that isn't actually getting the intervention, which usually is considered a bad thing as a patient, can be very small. And I do think that is going to be a big improvement. And if you take that further, we can actually maybe run fewer trials, which means even less burden, and which can also mean faster results to market. So in the end, it's all about how do we get the best cures to the market in the fastest way, and how do we then make sure that we decide that every individual is getting the right treatment. And that's, I think, where technology can help the most. So accelerating that process, but also helping with selecting the right treatment for the individual. And I think that's going to have incredible benefits for patients, because it's going to completely help reshape how the clinical trial and evidence-based medicine process works.
Dirk, that would be all for today. So thank you very much for your thoughts and inputs. We appreciate it endlessly. So we would like to wish you good luck with your current and future projects. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for watching. If you would like to be our next guest speaker, reach out. You can find the right email in the comment section below. And don't forget to subscribe.